The only thing I know firsthand about boxing comes from a few weeks spent in the summer of 1990 when a buddy and I found some boxing gloves and spent a bunch of afternoons whacking each other around in my childhood backyard. To be sure, the sparring was sloppy, but it certainly felt good. Surplus energy was expended, teen angst found an outlet, and some ancient tests of manhood passed and failed between us, unspoken. On the other end of the sessions, there were no ringside judges to declare this one that and that one this, but we walked away from each other with an unspoken mutual understanding, something like the respect that one man has for another who's just given him his best shot. No one told us then how to stand or how to jab or how to dance or duck. We just hit each other with what came naturally, in part, but mostly we threw our punches based on what we saw in the movies, specifically the Rocky pictures, which had at some point been steeped into our collective bloodstream. So what that comes down to is that we didn't know shit about the fine art of the sweet science, and I still don't. But the beauty is that you don't need to know much about the sport itself to have great reverence for it, because on some level we all understand that it transcends the defining confines of sport. And it's no coincidence that the word art follows martial in even the most basic definition of boxing. When we step into the ring alongside a fighter in a boxing picture, we're not looking at a mere man standing opposite us. We're looking at the embodiment of every lying cheat who's ever tried to steal something from us, every bad hand we've been dealt, every iniquity we've had to suffer, and all that we've yet to suffer. We feel the punches on a visceral level, just like we felt the beatings that life's dealt to us. Boxing was formalized by the Greeks some 700 years before Christ, but to be sure it took root in our DNA when we were still swinging from tree limbs by our tails. We'll be boxing in one form or another, in some science fiction future skyrocketing from one planet to the next, and I don't know about you, but I'll be boxing toe-to-toe with death himself around the edges of my own grave. Directed by legendary filmmaker John Huston, Fat City is a slice-of-life look at a pair of small-time fighters who, though under the tutelage of the same woefully underqualified, albeit well-intending manager, bring with them two starkly contrasting life experiences into the ring. Ernie, played by an impossibly young Jeff Bridges, is a sort of come-what-may, happy-go-lucky 18-year-old kid who takes what life throws at him, good, bad, and everything in between, with an affable good humor that's as endearing as it is infectious. In one of the first scenes of the picture, he spars with his dramatic counterpart, Tully, played by Stacy Keach, a seasoned veteran of almost 30 years old, who in turn encourages him to not let his talents go to waste, to not let his life slip away, to live his life while he's living it, and to go down to the local Skid Row gym to take up the sport in earnest. Ernie heeds the advice even though, as he notes to Tully, he was only fooling around in the gym and had no aspiration to do anything else with it. Outside the ring, Ernie knocks up a young girl as a matter of course, complying to the ebb and flow of his existence the way a jellyfish submits to the pull of a moon. Sometimes he gets knocked on his ass, sometimes he has to pass his boxer shorts to the next guy on the team who's fighting, sometimes he loses by decision, sometimes he gets a family, sometimes he falls in love, hell, sometimes he even feels like he's winning. And it's all the same to him more or less. Tully, the time-worn boxing veteran, is another story altogether. He's been knocked around by life so much there might as well be vacancy signs in his eyes. His wife has left him at some indistinct time in the past, and he's since been waging his main battle with the bottle. He lives in and among the fringes of a fringe town that seems to be as much a jail cell as it is a place to live or, as it were, to die. Tully's the kind of guy who's always doing bad and on his way to doing worse. He's always drowning. He's the inspiration for every great Tom Waits song. He attempts to mount a comeback with faltering degrees of success, getting pummeled for pittances in front of a rabid pack of drunks, having his pay ripped off or withheld for his own good. He fights desperately to rise above the confines of his life, to get back into shape, to reclaim whatever bit of glory in the ring he had in the past, and to maybe even get back his long-gone wife. But instead of rising above, we watch him sink into the joyless company of a basket case alcoholic, played brilliantly by Susan Tyrrell, who was nominated for an Oscar for the role. She pummels Tully even further into fate's submission, in ways that make an uppercut look like an ice cream cone in the park. When Tully finally drags his ass together enough to climb back into the ring for a relatively big fight, he wins almost in spite of himself, drawing on an energy and determination that lives somewhere below his mental processes. He doesn't even know he's won when it's over, because it doesn't really matter much if he did anyway. This is the skids we're talking about, after all. And therein lies the statement of the film. Houston goes about his business using a quote from one of his artistic heroes, Hemingway, as his compass. Winners take nothing. In and out of the ring, characters lose and lose and lose some more. When they win, they lose. But these are small losses we're talking about. Chump change, which only makes the losses seem all the more pitiful. With every punch the fighters throw, with every drop of blood they leak out onto the mat, the more they reach for the good life, the further away it gets. The chances of finding your way to Fat City from Skid Row are a goddamn joke. And the ending is astonishing, worthy of any of the heavyweights of cinema, Fellini and Bergman, Kubrick and Brothers Coen. I watched that end scene a few times now, and I'm still not sure what happened, what it was exactly that Houston intended or what he was trying to say. But maybe I have a theory. The two boxers are sitting at an Edward Hopper diner, a counterpoint to the first scene when they sparred one another before we got to know them. Tully at one point in the exchange says, "Before you get your life rolling," and makes a beeline for the drain. The boxers are helped by one of those types of guys so ancient that they're beyond recognition as human. But the guy is smiling. Tully asks Ernie, "How'd you like to wake up and be him? Jesus, what a waste." To which Ernie, his naivete still intact more or less, replies, "Well, maybe he's happy." Tully scoffs at this and says, cynically, "Yeah, maybe we're all happy." Just then something sucker punches him. He looks around the room at the desperate gamblers on the other side, and everything stops. Life stops. Time freezes. There's no smack you in the face crescendoing musical score to accompany this epiphany, but rather an absolute, terrifying silence. In the wake of it, Tully needs the company of the kid to just sit there with him as he sips his coffee, and as Houston lets the credits roll, brazenly. So what's happened in Tully's head? Maybe the kid better understands by disposition that if you look at things just in the right light, maybe even the shithole diner is Fat City. And maybe in the last scene that feels like a sharp jab to the nose, Tully finally, after years of his life beelining for the drain, gets it too. Houston's a director who's made many pictures that have entered the annals of immortality, and I hope this one is counted among them. Like all of his best work, Fat City feels like it's constructed of heart tissue. Though the film doesn't feel overly sentimental, the director himself said he felt a lot of sentiment for it. To hear him tell it, he grew up on streets like this, and he did a little boxing there too. But more than that is the inner turmoil of his main characters in all of his best works. The ones that I've seen revolve around desperate individuals living at odds with society, and they're either scrapping to prove their worth to the world or fighting to reclaim what it's robbed them of. He chronicles marginalized characters struggling desperately to find meaning on the desperate fringes of society, whether it's Bogart in Treasures of Sierra Madre, Hayden in Asphalt Juggle, Toulouse-Lautrec in Moulin Rouge, Brando in Reflections of a Golden Eye, Ahab in Moby Dick, or Hazel Motes in Wise Blood. These are men society has no good use for, even as they scratch and claw to prove their usefulness, to carve out a reason why they exist. When viewed as a whole, at least the aforementioned pictures that I've recently watched in preparation for this discussion, Houston's body of work reveals an expressionistic tapping essence out of reality, raw, potent meaning from grim, desperate platitudes, and working his canvas in exploration and exorcism of his personal demons, spinning wounds into honey and using that honey as inoculation. I can't do better than the horse himself. He said of Fat City that he was trying to make a picture about hope and failure, great misery alongside great wealth. He claimed that the fighter can never come to any good. The odds are always stacked against him. Even the tiniest fraction of men who become champion have no enduring security. But the fighter gives more to his profession than any artist I know. Houston says that we're all fighters. We all take those beatings, some spiritual, some mental, the luckiest of us, physical. And that's why the boxing genre will always endure. Now, I don't know who you are or what your fights have looked like, how bloody you are, but I know who I am more or less, and I know that after living a half a life, I know very well what it's like to fight, to have to fight, to want to fight, and I hope to God you do too, and then you hold on to your glories for as long as they'll let you, as you try to make your way to Fat City.
That's Fat City, John Huston. Joe, did you watch some other John Huston movies?
I did. Yeah, I watched a bunch of them. We had quite of an extended span of time between our recordings there, so
Right.
I went on a bit of a Houston kick, and it was long overdue.
He
Actually,
actually directed Sylvester Stallone in a movie called Victory.
is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is
Soccer movie,
yeah,
right?
it's a soccer movie. Yeah, but it's it's a World War II movie as well.
Right, right.
I think I remember that one from
Yeah,
when I was a
Michael
kid, actually seeing
Caine,
it.
Max von Sydow,
70,
right?
I want to say like 79 maybe.
81,
Oh, okay.
close. So that's interesting that he teamed up with Rocky Balboa at one point.
Yeah.
So you use the word loss a lot in this film, and I see it as clearly as you do, and I think that's a big word here. I found the film and the writing in particular to be very actually Bukowski-esque. Would you agree with that?
Well, certainly those scenes. Yeah, there's no question that that Bukowski could very well be inhabiting
Right,
those hole in the walls that they inhabit there.
right.
Scenery's fantastic. I mean, it's great, man. It's so gritty. It's fucking
It is.
wonderful.
Beautiful
I'm
Stockton, California.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm really glad you liked it. And like I said, I ran into this movie maybe about nine years ago, and just came out of nowhere for me. I just it was on Turner Classic Movies, and I just was like, boxing,
This really
why
came
not?
as a shock, Tom. I There's so many boxing pictures and documentaries. I mean,
Right, right.
there's
Trust me.
Tyson's and there's like 3 or 4 Tyson documentaries you could probably
Yeah.
could have. You know what I mean? There's just so much
Out
stuff, and
of the
this is
three
a nice
films
thing.
that we decided to that I decided to program, this is the one I was really excited about, and this is the one that I really want to hear everyone's opinion on, because I think that it's a fantastic film. It's actually talked about in a book that I think you guys might have heard called 1001 Must See Movies Before You Die.
Oh,
It's
that's so funny, dude. I just got that book from the library this week. That's so fucking crazy,
yeah,
man.
yeah, that's awesome. And that's how is that book?
It's also
Yeah,
it's great. I'm thumbing through it.
yeah, I bet.
I haven't gone into it, but they have if anybody's wanting for to program a theme here on the cutting room, all you have to do, you don't have to look any further than perusing that book for an afternoon.
I just
It's
find it amazing that you went to a library. That seems like a foreign concept living
Some
out here.
people still do that.
That's unbelievable. I mean, really,
when I
I
said that one time a couple of years ago, Adam,
yeah.
and Max was like, "You go to a
It's
library?"
I'm sitting here going, wow, I'll go into a library to check out a book. I haven't done that in so long. And not just because most of the libraries in LA smell like human urine. It's more that I just don't read that much anymore. But or I'll get a book if I want to do it, or I'll Kindle it. It's just that's a
You
trip.
know,
Do they have
yeah.
libraries in Los Angeles?
We do, but usually they're kind of public restrooms is what they are. They really smell like human urine. I'm
Uh,
not kidding. You can like a block away, you're coming up on the library.
hey, so Billy, this is a movie that I did assign to you to do the intro for. Things got mixed up. Joe did it, and he did it wonderfully. Houston wanted Marlon Brando for Billy Tully. Didn't get him. Obviously not. And Stacy Keach took the role. Do you think that this is a really underrated performance? I mean, it's just like kind of a lost great performance.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine Brando in that role. Actually, I mean, I guess he could have pulled it off, but I mean, Keach is great. I don't really know him from too many movies. What else are? I mean, he's one of those actors I've seen in so many movies, and I can't remember which ones.
I think that
What are some of the good roles?
he winds up becoming like kind of like a bad in my and just thinking about him.
He was around the '80s for a
He
while.
was in the 80s, but he was Mike Hammer. That was his big.
That's
Yeah,
it.
that's
That's
right. I remember
That
that.
Mike Hammer was that's his claim to fame. But besides Mike Hammer, he also, I think, worked in and out of a lot of B
Yeah,
sci-fi horror movies.
yeah. That's kind
Uh,
of what and crime movies too. Almost
right,
like I think I recall him being in a lot of those like late '80s, early '90s, like Cinemax thriller type things.
yeah,
right,
Yeah,
exactly. But he's
yeah.
kind of like resurfaced over the past 10 years in good films. Like he was in American History X.
yeah.
He's really good in that, and he's in
Vasca.
Nebraska, right? So he's kind of
Oh, that's
yeah,
right.
he's
That's
kind of
right.
getting you get these younger directors who kind of like have a soft spot for some of these actors that didn't quite make it, so to say, like in that Tarantino kind of way,
Well,
they
and
love
it's funny because they're such solid performers. They're like, I
right.
mean, it's a good boxing metaphor itself. Like just surviving in a
Sure.
career like that for so long is amazing. But yeah, I was kind of blown away because he in this movie is, I guess he was mostly a Broadway performer at this point. He was doing like small off Broadway plays and stuff.
Yes, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
yeah, man, he comes across as like, very much that actually Brando-esque school of acting, which is sort of
Agreed.
not looking, not performing, but just being the character in front of a camera, and whatever happens, happens. And that scene with him and the barmaid just drunk, like it's
That's
like
such a
three
great
o'clock in
scene,
the
man.
afternoon,
Right.
and they're
That's what
just
makes it
like,
so great, dude.
it's just
Yeah.
unbelievable, man. I mean, I was just like
And
she
they're
is
yeah.
so annoying in that scene. It's amazing, right? Like she's so perfectly that character, and the two of them, the way he just talks her down. I didn't even put the Bukowski connection together, but I totally felt like I was watching a scene right out of Barfly.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly. I mean, just
There's such an authenticity of those scenes. It really for the first time, I didn't know much about Houston before this, to be honest with you. And just seeing this, you could feel that he knows that scene. He was a guy who was a heavy drinker and partier, and he knew that scene inside and out. You know what I mean?
labor
Like,
of love this is, Joe, I think,
absolutely, I think
and
so.
knowing you mentioned that he was a boxer in his early life. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that he wanted to put some kind of film together about boxing, and he found this novel by Leonard Gardner, fell in love with it, wanted to make a movie out of it, and he did. And it's really just one of those hidden gems, I think.
I think so, man. He made so many films. I
And this would be
really
the
need to
last
check
thing
them.
that you would associate John Huston with, because look, I mean, you mentioned his earlier works, which are classics. I mean, like all time. I mean, just classic movies. But to
Yeah.
me, I always knew John. Me in pre 1970, Joe. But I always knew him from Prizzi's Honor. That was like one of the last movies he made, and he did Victory, he did Annie, and
The Dead, I think. Right? The Dead, wasn't that one of his
That
last
was his
That
films?
was
last
his last
picture.
one,
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah. So I mean,
He did this movie one Billy knows well. He doesn't know this movie well. You're familiar with the material. Wise Blood. Not too long after this, which feels a lot like this,
Yeah, I
like
did
this
end up
picture.
watching that movie finally. The
You
the
did.
the novella is one of my favorite crazy pieces of literature ever. But yeah, I mean, I kind of grew up with John Huston, so his old movies are like, deep in my memory. The
they
Treasure
would,
of the Sierra
Asphalt
yeah,
Jungle is maybe one of my favorite. Is definitely
Yeah, The
one of my
Maltese
top 10
Falcon
films, man.
remains one of my all-time favorite detective movies, and Treasure of the Sierra Madre is
and
amazing
he
too.
did that
Arthur
Judge Roy
Miller.
Bean movie too, right, with
Yeah,
Newman.
yeah, he did The
Yeah,
African Queen. I mean, there's like,
The African Queen. That's right.
yeah,
That's
he's
crazy,
he's
man.
amazing, but he also at a certain point started kind of vacillating between these really smaller sort of chamber pieces and these big Hollywood productions.
interesting.
And even one of my favorite of his later like 70s movies is The Man Who Would Be King with Sean Connery and
Yeah.
oh, why am I forgetting his name? Michael the Cockney, the great Cockney.
Michael Caine.
Yeah, and it's amazing. It's like such a fantastic thing, but it's based on a Rudyard Kipling adventure story, but even buried within the sort of grandiose, scale of the picture and everything, it's there's still an existential, like erosion under the story that he was always good at. Like from his first movie, The Maltese Falcon is totally about characters who are sort of skating on thin ice, like the ground is about to go out from under them any second. And he had that throughout his whole career, which was
Yeah.
amazing. But yeah, Wise Blood and this one are sort of like companion pieces, aren't they?
Yeah, and also that one Reflections in the Golden Eye that he did get Brando in was
I
way
never
ahead of
seen
its
that.
time, man. Yeah, I just watched it for the first time this week. About Brando plays a repressed homosexual like army general, not general, but like higher up on an army base
Oh,
or whatever.
I've heard of this movie. I know. Yeah.
I mean, people weren't with Elizabeth Taylor. It's nuts, man. The guy, it's just great when you like for the show. Sometimes I'll just go on a stint, Tom, and I'll just watch a whole bunch of movies by the same guy in a row. And while, yeah, I have always loved The Maltese Falcon, Asphalt Jungle, and some of these other pictures,
Right.
when you start watching them together, you start getting an understanding of the guy. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And I just really. I had no, when you watch those movies like as one-offs, you don't understand that there's there's something really like common about them. Like I was saying in that review, like these desperate characters trying like they don't fit into society and they're trying to prove themselves or get back something and
Literally, like
scrabbling on the
literally, The Man Who Would Be King is about two British soldiers who think that they're gonna go reclaim the treasure of Alexander the Great. So they abandon the British army in India and try to
Yeah.
cross the Himalayas to get to the secret kingdom. And it's like he does an adventure story. It's a big Hollywood adventure picture and everything, but it's based on the exact same premise as the characters in Fat City. They're looking
and
for
same
Fat
with
City, you know?
Yeah, and same with one of his first pictures, the Asphalt Jungle, which I just recently watched. The guy Sterling Hayden. There's this complicated heist business going on, and like this cat and mouse game or whatever, and there's like just this spot on film noir. But at the bottom of it is this dude who just got kicked off of his farm as a kid, and all he's trying to do in the Asphalt Jungle is work his way out of it to get back back to the farm. You know what I mean? And it's just
A great,
it's just amazing.
like unsung classic of his is "Beat the Devil." If you guys ever get a chance, check that out. It's kind
I
of
just watched
it's
it.
famous in Hollywood because apparently they just had as much fun making the movie. Like it was,
They made it on like in the hills of the Sicily or something.
yeah,
I
and
know
it was
it's
just like they
in
were on
Italy, I think.
vacation, and they're like there are takes where they crack up laughing in the middle of a take, and he just leaves it in
Yeah.
there. Like, but
I couldn't watch something. I gave up on it, to be honest with you. It's like the transfer is just terrible. Like
oh yeah,
it looked terrible. But yeah, it feels like a student film. It's fucking crazy that
yeah,
a guy
it's very
like in the middle of the
improvisational
Hollywood
and low budget, and yeah.
What year was that made?
53.
Oh wow.
And it was huge. It was Humphrey Bogart, Jennifer Jones, Peter Lorre, but it just feels like oof, the whole thing, you know.
Yeah, it's fucking
They were probably all drunk the entire time they were making that movie.
Well, Adam, we're talking, John Huston here. Let's get back to Fat City. Creed is kind of like this father and son drama. And we're going to talk about the fighter in just a little bit. And, you're dealing with two brothers here. This one's a little bit different. I think this one is, there's a lot of loneliness here, where the fighter's kind of like on his own. They have a really bad manager. Wouldn't you say, Adam? I mean, this guy is just completely ridiculous. But what did you take out of Fat City as far as it being a little bit different than, the boxer and trainer relationship,
Sure.
whether it's brotherly or father and son or
Well,
whatever?
I found this one. It was more like it was, almost wasn't a boxing movie in a sense. It was boxing as a metaphor, I thought, and it was just not necessarily the thrust of the movie. You probably could have put these two guys in Stockton doing some other kind of work and coming together. And so I just,
It's a good point.
so I liked that part of the storytelling and loved that it was set in Stockton. Loved the way that Houston works with actors and just allows them to do their thing. And yeah, absolutely, what a great role for Stacy Keach, who's been around forever and has worked consistently, but never was necessarily. I mean, he did have the series in the '80s.
Right.
But yeah, the dude was strong. I could see Brando in that role, but I'm so glad that it was Keach because it was
I think
great.
I agree with you. I was kind of like, wow. I mean, it would have been such a different, it would have been different. Although, you see them pretty much, doing the same things. It's with Brando. There's always something. It's
Sure.
it's gonna turn the movie into something else. But
Well, then it's a Brando film.
exactly. And
and
Keach,
yeah.
Keach just does Billy Tully, and
Yeah.
that's what it makes this movie so beautiful. It's just why. And Joe, you mentioned just something about his eyes, right, in the film, just like looking into Keach's eyes.
Yeah, there's a vacancy. He might as well have
Yeah,
vacancies.
The
in.
dead eyes. He had the dead
Right,
eyes.
right. And
Yeah.
you just get that. And you're right, with the boxing being somewhat of a metaphor. And you guys were talking before about Susan Terrell and Stacy Keach in the bar.
God,
And they're
she was amazing in this
Yeah,
movie.
awesome.
they're basically having like this sparring session with words,
Yep.
and it's just so fucking amazing.
Just a different.
He did the biggest beating in the film is the one that he takes from Susan
Right.
Tyrell.
Yeah, all the time. Even at the end of the picture when he goes to pick up his clothes.
Oh, it's the worst. It's the worst.
I love how Houston doesn't really even show her. You just kind of hear her. I mean, you see her for a second. She kind of peeks around the corner, but that whole scene is brilliant because her presence is so strong, and yet you don't see her in that scene.
Yeah. Well, she's like a fucking tornado leading up to that scene. You know what I mean? Like you can't, she's crazy, but it's so spot on where. I'm trying to think of this specifically. What was she arguing about, Tom? Like, at first she's like, you want me to eat, and then she's like, all right, I'll eat.
Steak, yeah,
like, yeah, eat the steak, and then she comes in, I don't want you to eat the steak. Whatever she was having. It's so spot on. Like the illogical basis of their argument.
What I found interesting about that scene was he dropped the ketchup on the floor. It broke, and for a very small place that looked like it had no little food, they had a backup bottle of ketchup.
It's so funny because I thought the same thing. I was
how
like,
is that
they
even
have nothing,
possible?
but they have a backup.
Right, and it's like, and for some reason, it's important because it's like it's showcased in that scene. It's like, bang, the bottle drops, it's broken, it's just ketchup all over the floor, and yet there's a backup bottle of ketchup in that apartment.
Keach thought this was, I think, up until that time anyway, it was his favorite role. For some time afterwards, man, he was happiest with this one.
I'm sure. I mean,
what a role! That's like a once in a lifetime role.
Absolutely.
And what about Jeff Bridges, man? I mean,
it was like the young dude.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. I mean, he's playing what, like an 18-year-old in the.
He is like 18. He's
well, Houston had asked his brother Bo to play that part, and he wound up. Bo said, "Listen, I think I'm just a little bit too old to play this role. Why don't you try my brother Jeff?" And he liked Jeff.
Yeah, I think the only other picture that Jeff had been in by that time was the Bogdanovich picture. Was it
Picture Show?
Yeah, Last Picture Show.
You're right about that. And then, I mean, from Fat City, he went on to make that. What was that big movie with Clint Eastwood that he was in? That buddy movie, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot.
No, I don't know that one.
Yeah,
man.
that one was like, I think that started to get him in the Hollywood scene, and then obviously King Kong came along for Jeff Bridges. And after that, he just started, I mean, once the 80s got here, he just blew up. I mean, Starman and Against All Odds were huge. The Jagged Edge, all huge successes.
What was the movie where with Michelle Pfeiffer and he was in it with his brother?
Fabulous Baker Boys.
Yeah, there you go.
Is that a Coppola movie?
I don't know.
I don't think so. And of course, one of the greatest movies ever made, Big Lebowski.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, of course. You can't.
All roads his career points straight to that.
It does. It's true.
This was like a little, his character in Fat City was almost a little dude, almost like had the right, that same kind of attitude.
You know what's crazy, Adam? When I went to go see that movie in San Diego, coming out of that movie theater, I couldn't believe. I didn't really know much about Jeff. I mean, I didn't really know much about Jeff Bridges at the time. Somebody I heard you know how you overhear people talking on the way out of the movie theater. Someone was like, I don't know. It was not the right guy. They just did not cast the right actor.
Oh, that's funny.
What?
I swear to God. I mean, this is before the movie became a phenomenon, but still.
The movie tanks. It's hilarious. It's just so crazy what becomes a phenomenon and what doesn't, right?
Yeah. Yeah, imagine that film tanking. Crazy.
It didn't do well in the theater. I didn't even know that.
No, it sank
No.
without a trace.
Well,
Which is
luckily,
hilarious. Now they have whole conventions devoted to
conventions. I mean, you can't get enough. I mean,
Con.
yeah.
He wrote a book in the character of the dude, I believe, right?
They'll be cashing in on that for a lifetime.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant film, and yeah, they have at bowling alleys like costume event parties all over the country.
That's amazing.
Hmm.
You're right, Billy. They're going to be cashing in on that forever.
Bridges is great though. I mean, he's like, I hate it when actors sort of become like a joke and like a hipster joke or whatever. But man, in the right role, that guy's great. Like he was his True Grit version was awesome. Like that movie where he plays the burned out musician who's going around the country playing.
Oh, wild,
Crazy Heart.
crazy hard.
Yeah,
He,
man.
he's
good.
really good in that, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And then he pops up even in those, like, an Iron Man, and he does a good job. He's always game, that dude. I love a movie called The Contender with him. He actually plays the president of the United States. It's this really kind of
Joan
like,
Allen, right?
yeah, Joan Allen, Gary
Yeah.
Oldman is
I
sensational in
remember
this
that.
movie.
That's a good flick.
It's a really good flick, and it's kind of like one of just like this lost political drama that was out in the early 2000s. And Christian Slater, Joan Allen, Philip Baker Hall. I mean, Oldman. It's just William Peterson, who's I love William Peterson. Big fan of him, and like it's just down the line, just like these great character actors
The
all come
Fisher
together.
King, man. I don't know if you guys
No,
like the
that's
movie.
that's I like the Fisher King a lot, but I'm not. People like love the Fisher King, I think you do, Billy, right?
Yeah, I think it's pretty awesome, and I think his performance in it is amazing.
Yeah.
Like because he's kind of doing like what would happen if Howard Stern like encountered something that stopped him cold and like gave him an existential crisis, you know?
Right, right.
And he's just so fucking good in that, man.
Yeah, I mean that's a really I mean the thing is he's a broadcaster, right? He's a radio
Yeah,
host. Yeah,
and he did a Peter Weir flick called Fearless,
I
where
never
he
saw that.
Oh,
survives
that's a
plane crash.
great
Oh,
film.
that is a good one.
Yeah.
Really good film.
Yeah, for sure. He was, it's funny with actors. They go through these like 10-year cycles where they'll do like 4 years of amazing movies, and then everyone kind of loses track of them for a bit, and then they come back, and it's like, hey, they're as good now as they were 10 years ago.
Right, right.
He played a very good creepy serial killer in Vanishing.
Right, which was the
Oh,
remake of that
yeah, Barney.
Kiefer Sutherland, right?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a remake too of
A French picture, yeah.
yeah, that was really really popular. And I think it's the same director too. I think he does both versions.
Yeah, it's not a French guy. It's like a Danish dude that directed, I think.
Okay.
Mm.
It might, yeah. So I don't know the full story there.
He is ultra creepy in that movie, Adam,
Mhm.
The Vanishing. I mean, with that
Mhm.
hair. Oh, you know what? One more quick thing with Jeff Bridges, and then we'll move on to The Fighter. Another movie too this is like a conspiracy theory film, Arlington Road, with Tim Robbins. Anybody ever check this film out?
I actually saw that in
Yes.
the theater.
Yes.
Yeah, I did too. Billy, Jeff, my brother Jeff and I saw it in the theater. That's weird. What a weird movie to see in the theater. But I
It was-
remember I went
Well,
to
it was
see it.
the late '90s. I was going to a movie
Right.
every week. Like
Mhm.
I was on, I was working for myself and making a lot of money for a 20-year-old, and I
Right.
was spending all my free cash on going to the movie. So
Okay,
I literally,
pictures.
I think I saw She's All That with Freddie Prinze Jr. because it was the only thing in the theater that I had not seen that month. Like I was seeing everything.
On that note,
Arlington Road. You were gonna say something, Tom.
no, no. Jeff and I went to see that film as well in the theater. I remember taking them, and it was mostly because I think there was there was nothing playing at the time. So, we had this discussion. We're like, what, I think we narrowed it down to a couple movies, and we chose Arlington Road, and I'm glad I did because it was kind of interesting. And I love Tim Robbins. I don't know how anybody feels about him, but I totally dig him. But listen, guys, let's move on from Fat City. It was a great discussion talking about John Huston going down memory lane with Jeff Bridges. That is fucking great. I'm glad everybody really dug the film too, man. Check it out, Fat City, 1972, directed by John Huston. Let's move on to The Fighter, directed by David O. Russell, another interesting director. This one stars Amy Adams, Christian Bale, Melissa Leo, Mark Wahlberg. Billy's going to do the introduction. So, Billy, why don't you take it for us, man? Do it.
The only thing I know firsthand about boxing comes from a few weeks spent in the summer of 1990 when a buddy and I found some boxing gloves and spent a bunch of afternoons whacking each other around in my childhood backyard. To be sure, the sparring was sloppy, but it certainly felt good. Surplus energy was expended, teen angst found an outlet, and some ancient tests of manhood passed and failed between us, unspoken. On the other end of the sessions, there were no ringside judges to declare this one that and that one this, but we walked away from each other with an unspoken mutual understanding, something like even the most basic definition of boxing. When we step into the ring alongside a fighter in a boxing picture, we're not looking at a mere man standing opposite us. We're looking at the embodiment of every lying cheat who's ever tried to steal something from us, every bad hand we've been dealt, every iniquity we've had to suffer, and all that we've yet to suffer. We feel the punches on a visceral level, just like we felt the beatings that life's dealt to us. Boxing was formalized by the Greeks some 700 years before Christ, but to be sure it took root in our DNA when we were still swinging from tree limbs by our tails. We'll be boxing in one form or another, in some science fiction future skyrocketing from one planet to the next, and I don't know about you, but I'll be years old, who in turn encourages him to not let his talents go to waste, to not let his life slip away, to live his life while he's living it, and to go down to the local Skid Row gym to take up the sport in earnest. Ernie heeds the advice even though, as he notes to Tully, he was only fooling around in the gym and had no aspiration to do anything else with it. Outside the ring, Ernie knocks up a young girl as a matter of course, complying to the ebb and flow of his existence the way a jellyfish submits to the pull of a moon. Sometimes he gets knocked on his ass. Sometimes he has to pass his boxer shorts to the next guy on the team who's fighting. Sometimes he loses by decision. Sometimes he gets a family. Sometimes he falls in love. Hell, sometimes he even feels like he's winning. Like the respect that one man has for another who's just given him his best shot. No one told us then how to stand or how to jab or how to dance or duck. We just hit each other with what came naturally, in part, but mostly we threw our punches based on what we saw in the movies, specifically the Rocky pictures, which had at some point been steeped into our collective bloodstream. So what that comes down to is that we didn't know shit about the fine art of the sweet science, and I still don't. But the beauty is that you don't need to know much about the sport itself to have great reverence for it, because on some level we all understand that it transcends the defining confines of sport. And it's no coincidence that the word art follows martial, boxing toe-to-toe with death himself around the edges of my own grave. Directed by legendary filmmaker John Huston, Fat City is a slice-of-life look at a pair of small-time fighters who, though under the tutelage of the same woefully underqualified, albeit well-intending manager, bring with them two starkly contrasting life experiences into the ring. Ernie, played by an impossibly young Jeff Bridges, is a sort of come-what-may, happy-go-lucky 18-year-old kid who takes what life throws at him, good, bad, and everything in between, with an affable good humor that's as endearing as it is infectious. In one of the first scenes of the picture, he spars with his dramatic counterpart, Tully, played by Stacy Keach, a seasoned veteran of almost 30.